Welcome back, everybody, to Neutrality Studies. My name is Pescalota, and I'm joined today again by Stanislav Krapivnik from Moscow. Stas, welcome back.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Great having you back. You're always giving us good updates, and we need to talk about Iran again. Of course, now in the context of the now 4 or 5 days old US blockade that is happening. Can you maybe give me your interpretation of why the US decided to blockade a strait which it wants to unblock from the Iranian from Iranian control? What's the rationale behind there?
Okay, so during the negotiations, and I was talking with Professor Morandi, who I'm friends with, what he was telling me, they basically went on all the points and found agreements, common ground on all the points. There was discussion on removing Iran's nuclear material to a third party, to Russia, for storage in Russia. That's not a new issue. That, by the way, that proposal's been up several times before. Or going back to strict regulations, which the Iranians had agreed upon when Obama concluded concluded the deal with them that Trump promptly ripped up. When they got to the Straits of Hormuz, that's the problem, because the U.S. kind of wants to own the Straits of Hormuz. See, there's four choke points, major choke points in the world for trade: Panama, the Red Sea, Straits of Hormuz, the Red Sea from both ends, of course, or just the whole body of the Red Sea, Straits of Hormuz, and the waters that go past between Indonesia and Malaysia go past Singapore. But those you can actually go around, right? Because they're still islands. It's longer, but you can go around further down Indonesia and swing around by Java. So that's the hardest thing to control, because there's plenty of ways to get around it. It's just a bit more expensive. But the other 3 points are absolute choke points. Now, the Red Sea is not a reality for the Americans because on the one side is the Suez Canal, which the Egyptians aren't exactly thrilled to surrender for obvious reasons. So the Israelis claim that as part of Greater Israel. So one day that's going to have to be resolved as an issue. On the other side is the Houthis, and the U.S. has already tried to control those straits once, twice before. That didn't quite work out either. But with this case, they were insisting on sovereignty over the Straits of Hormuz, basically for Iran just to give up sovereignty and step back from its own territory. Now, believe you me, if the Americans get that, they'll be charging tolls as well. That's 100% guaranteed, and probably a lot more than $2 million. So we have that. And that was, of course, a stopping point that they can go further on, and then the American team left. And what Morandi was telling me was not. I mean, just to understand the difference too. The Iranian team, when they went down there, he was part of that team. They went to Khomeini. Khomeini said, "I trust you. Negotiate. You got full authority to negotiate." The American team, two Zionist agents and Vance, said Witkoff and Kushner, because God, what would you do without two New York real estate moguls who answered to Netanyahu, for God's sakes? But that's not enough, obviously. The Vance called Trump 12 times during those negotiations. Okay, obviously, at least you could say, Trump is his boss. Okay, so you can go with that. But then he also kept calling Netanyahu.
Yeah.
From what Morandi was telling me. And given reports to Netanyahu, getting his instructions. So let that sink in. The vice president of the United States is negotiating an end to a war that America started while we were at it, and is getting his marching orders from the prime minister of a quote client country.
Yeah.
I mean, Yeah,
Marani was telling me the same on my show. It's quite incredible, but apparently this is just how it works. It's like constant triangulation, right, between the capitals.
oh, it's worse than that.
Yeah. I mean, it's marching orders from Tel
It's worse
Aviv, of course.
right. But it's worse than that because um, Netanyahu. This is like a an exercise in shaming, or an exercise in well, shaming, as that's the best way to put it. He blurted it out that yeah, that Vance was calling me, and I was there basically. It's got two of his own agents there to begin with, absolute assets of Netanyahu, and he's giving marching word, and he's bragging about this, right? He is putting them in their place, right? And he's showing the world when he's doing that the Americans are below his feet. That he's the boss.
Which goes very
And
well with the rest that they've been doing. I mean, there was the German chancellor the other day that had a tiny little bit of critique about Israel in the, I think it was his indiscriminate bombings in Lebanon or something like that, and then the foreign minister of Iran immediately lashed out and said, like, we're not taking any orders from any kind of German. If you forgot what you did to us 80 years ago and so on. It's quite insane. I mean, they're really putting these other whites in their place way beneath them, and so they did the same with the negotiations in Tehran, of course.
of course, this is this is all going to in the end backfire massively on the Israelis. Um, Never mind, when the traditional Jews are saying, um, what was one of the guys that said, uh, Hitler made me afraid of being a Jew. Israel's made me ashamed of being a Jew. That's the split is massive now. From it was before on religious grounds. Now it's just on something much worse, and the support for Israel is just collapsing everywhere. Because I mean, they're looking at people that have totally gone off the reservation. They have lost all sight of the shoreline and are out there in the deep, and are getting more psychotic by the day.
Yep.
They're getting meaner, eviler, and more psychotic every single day, and they're flaunting it. They're absolutely flaunting it.
Yeah. May I ask you though now, I read this news of the TASS news agency that says that the
Mhm.
Russian Security Council is warning that these negotiations could be masking a planned strike, I mean boots on the ground against Iran, because the US is still amassing troops not too far off from Iran. Did you hear anything about this? And do you think the US is preparing something now in the cover of these negotiations?
What's that term? Captain Obvious?
Yeah, but the ground invasion. I mean, preparing a ground invasion would be quite an insane thing to do. We talked about this before, but it's not getting any saner.
Yeah, it's not getting say. Look, the sanest thing at this point, the sanest thing would have been never to start this, but obviously we've gone past that for the last month and a half, and we continue to sail downriver further and further from reality. The sanest thing we have that Trump could do now is allow this blockade to continue and peter itself out. It's very hard to understand any of what this blockade has done, because on the American side, oh, we've controlled everything. The Iranian side, yeah, our ships are still going. So I cannot imagine exactly American ships coming up to the Iranian coast, where Iranian ships are hugging the coast, heading into Pakistani waters, and trying to stop them. They're a very short missile flight from becoming a reef. If they do that, first of all, let's begin with the fact that the U.S. Navy can't do this for very long. The U.S. Navy is stretched to the breaking point. Its mission has continued to be the same mission it was during the Cold War, with less than half the ships that it had before. A lot of the ships are broken, and most of the aircraft carriers are broken. They're understaffed because they can't get enough people in. They're overstressed. I mean, just the Ford itself, 11 months at sea, with two very, very short stops for resupply and fixed. The people are broken and they're worn out. And this is the entire U.S. Navy. If you talk to people like, for example, talking to Cameron McGregor, he's a former Navy officer, and he's like, even back when he left a few years back, it was already basically broken, and it's just gotten worse. The people he's in, his classmates, academy that he's in contact with, it's getting horrible. People are leaving. You can't keep people in, and a lot of the people that are in are not fully trained, and you're not fully staffed. So it's huge issues. It's absolutely huge issues. And if they continue this mission, they'll just drive themselves into the ground permanently.
Right.
So the best thing would do, because what they're trying to do is, okay, so Iran's not letting everybody out, then we won't let Iran out. That way, nobody gets any order, which of course just exasperates even further the world crisis. It kills American PR because even, I mean, you've got America's vassals. I'm not going to call them anything but vassals. You got the EU vassals of America, which trying to spin all this on Iran's fault, even though that it was their owner that struck first, or their two owners that struck first, and Iran responded, having warned that it would do that. But now you can't even spin it that way because it's the Americans. So it's a major PR hit. Iran apparently has already had a short conversation with Saudi Arabia that if you either back us or that little those slow pumping stations in the Red Sea, they're not going to exist either, and you're not going to get any oil, period, which would collapse the Saudi economy. So you're in a very bad place now. Like I said, if the Americans would do this right, at this point they keep the blockade in, and it just peters out over a couple of weeks, and then Trump declares victory. For the MAGA that's left, because most of the MAGA left, the people that voted for peace, the people that voted for what the Vance position was earlier, take care of the issues inside, and there are mammoth issues inside the country. It's just collapsing. It's rotted out. It's collapsing. There's issue. Education is third world. Medicine is third world. People can't afford housing. The young people can't afford a life. Period. It's a total collapse of society. That's what they should be concentrating. That's what they voted for. All those people have left. The people that are left in MAGA are groupies. They're fanatics. They're groupies. They're the people that bought Trump coins. They're the people like who are backing Trump and screaming at the Pope. Oh yeah, because the Pope suggested, maybe we should have peace. Where's that in Christianity for them? These are people that are blind faith, will believe anything that Trump spits out, and will thank him for it. So if Trump, for that base, which is still a very small base compared to what he had, but if he told them tomorrow, victory, get on an aircraft carrier and declare victory like George Bush Jr. did, they'd believe it. They'd accept it. Either way, he's screwed when it comes to the elections at this point. The U.S. is in a deep recession. It may be in a depression by the time this is over. So, but that would be the best case scenario.
Hey, very brief intermission because I was recently banned from YouTube, and although I'm back, this can happen anytime again. So please consider subscribing not only here, but to my mailing list on Substack. That's pascalotta.substack.com. The link's going to be in the description below, and now back to the video. So the question to me really is, what are they currently planning? I mean, that something more is going to come is obvious, but what it will be, because now we have TASS that reports that Russia's Security Council is expecting a ground invasion. On the other hand, we have this kind of, sane people thinking about what is possible. They would argue, as you do, like let's let this blockade kind of thing taper out or whatnot. One thing that would be very, very reasonable for me to what comes next is something that happened in the First and the Second World War, when Britain blockaded its enemies, but because you cannot control the shorelines, all of them, what you do is you introduce the idea of navicerts, to tell third states that they need to apply in your office, in your embassy, for the right to go anywhere. So, the United States could do that very easily, say like, okay, anyone who wants to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, you need to apply with us in Washington to go through there. And if you don't do that, then we're going to blacklist you and we might board you or whatnot, or we might just sanction those ships. That would be relatively easy to do and straightforward. But this administration is not one that goes for the doable, I believe. So, do you think that a ground invasion is actually on the cards?
Well, for what you're saying with the before we get on the ground invasion, what you're saying about register with our office, that'll work to a degree. Look, the U.S. blockade on Cuba, yeah, everything's great until the Russian tanker arrived with a frigate and an attack submarine escort. And what did the U.S. do? Got the hell out of the way. There's another one coming, and it's going to have the same escort, and they're going to get the hell out of the way. Because if they don't, it's war. It's war with a nuclear superpower that can, with an army that can destroy the American army. It may hit hard for some people to hear that, but that's the reality of it. And yeah, what are they going to do when the Chinese arrive with the same thing, with a convoy of tankers and 3 or 4 destroyers? Do you want to start a war with China now? I mean, the U.S. Well, it's sometime in the future, but it's not ready for
Yeah,
that.
but you can fragment with a move like this. You could fragment the fleets, right? You can create ships that can only go from China to Iran and nothing else. And for the Russians, I mean, you kind of inconvenience everybody, but that would be something
You're inconvenienced. But here's an idea. What happens? First of all, what happens if China takes in, say, 10 tankers, and then resells the extra oil to Southeast Asia?
Yeah.
What happens if Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam decide to go, hey, why don't we form a coalition and send in our convoy of tankers with our warships? Is the U.S. ready to fight a coalition of countries in Southeast Asia? I mean, when you start looking at this can expand out very, very quickly. People are not dumb. They sit there, they pay attention. Okay. They step back when military force arrives. Now, having said that, ground invasion. If you want to give the gift that keeps on giving, it'll keep on giving every time there's an American soldier that gets killed. It'll be the gift that keeps on giving to Iran. I mean, this is basically Trump can take a nail gun to his temple and just start nailing his head in. That would be that level of stupidity. Will they do that? Well, they just may do that. I think the White House has gotten insane enough. I was interviewing a friend of mine, Robert Barnes, and he's a constitutional lawyer in the U.S. By the way, his big client right now to defend is the Amish, because apparently federal, state, and local governments are going after the Amish. Again, who goes after the Amish? Well, apparently they're now the target. The second half of the interview, we were talking about his direct contacts in the White House, the present White House, and they're telling them that Trump's gone off the deep end. He's totally off the deep end. Vance is running like a rat in a wheel, trying to keep all of this from going to nuclear war. That he's the rational one. Vance has basically given up on his presidential run because Trump sunk him. But he's trying to keep it all from going nuclear, and kind of, I guess, wants to have his kids grow up and not in a bunker. So this is the point we're at. Should the 25th Amendment be used? More than likely, yes. We're getting there if we're not there already.
Right. So there was this argument also made by Trita Parsi, the chief of the think tank Responsible Statecraft, I think, and his argument was that actually now that there is a ceasefire in place, and if no side starts shooting again, I mean, this actually puts the United States into the stronger seat, because under the war scenario where they were fighting each other, while Iran had to sustain a lot of damage, since they were standing, every single day that it continued, like, developed the war in their favor. Now that everything is standing still and the United States has time again to replenish and rearmament and everything, the balance of forces has actually tilted the other way around, and Iran is actually structurally in the weaker seat, especially because if it started shooting again without being shot at, it would probably make Russia and China quite angry, and be again seen as the source of instability. What do you make out of that argument, and how do you think that the ceasefire, the diplomacy and politics of the ceasefire, is actually developing for Iran?
Well, we obviously saw from the Russian side that warning is an acknowledgement of reality. So that's if you read it a little bit sideways, that warning is a backup to the Iranians. We understand that the Americans are probably getting ready to attack you again. So don't be surprised, and we're not going to be surprised or shocked. Not quite as sure of the Chinese, because this is playing on Chinese weaknesses. The Americans are. But as far as rearming, sure, if this holds for the next 2.5 to 3 years, the Americans will be rearmed, maybe. I mean, we're talking infinitesimally small rates of production. The Patriot is a prime example. The Patriot, first of all of these missiles are hand built, because that maximizes their cost, that maximizes the profit. Because the U.S. military normally runs off of a system called cost plus, which is an asinine system. So if the item costs $100, say cost plus is cost plus 10%, 10% profit, as an example. So if the item costs $100, you charge $110 and you get $10 profit. If you can make the item cost, or at least on paper, cost $500, then you get a $50 profit. If really it only costs $100. You maximize the cost of the item, not by automated production, but by doing it by hand. Look, every one of them is a master at his skill. He's got to put the plug in, each plug and test separately, and so on. And you can inflate the cost infinitely on that, and you maximize your profits. But that, of course, has big problems, because you kind of have a high end on production that you really can't expand easily. You cannot set up a second line of production like an automobile line. It just doesn't exist. And you have to get more and more people, and the space has to be larger and larger. So you get certain constraints. The military-industrial complex promised Trump to double and triple their production. Okay, let's say they double production of Patriot missiles. So right now they're producing somewhere between 35 and 40 Patriot missiles per month. Okay, so we double it to 80. To 100. Okay, how long does that hold up? That's a day. That's maybe 2 days, and that's what you produce in a month. So you cannot, the volume that's demanded, and we're not even talking about Ukraine and the EU at this point. The volume that's demanded, just say on the Iranian side, to stop the Iranian incoming missiles, you can't produce enough, obviously. Offensive missiles. The high accuracy missiles, the new missiles that they're producing, they're supposed to replace the ATACMS. They're all gone. There was a very small batch of them. Basically, they tested them, but they're gone right now. They have to be built. The ATACMS are a very limited quantity too, to begin with. There was less than 1,000 ATACMS before this conflict started. A lot of them were being shipped. The U.S., I think, built like 2,500 ATACMS. 1,000 were sold at places like South Korea and Taiwan, and then another 400 or so went to Ukraine and have been used up. And they were using additional ATACMS on Iran, but they have a very short range, like 350 kilometers. So they're relatively short range. I mean, you can fire them from Bahrain or Qatar into Iran, but you're not going to go very deep into Iran. Obviously, Iran's giant. So there's that problem. Okay, so Tomahawks. Tomahawks are producing something like around also about 10 a month. Obviously, and again, it's handmade, hand assembled. So no matter what you do, you have major issues. Sure, could you expand this? Yes, you could build new factories, automated factories to produce them. but you're having 2, 3 years to build a factory like that. It's not something you just flip your fingers and snap your fingers and it appears, flip the lights on, and there you go. I mean, this takes a long time. Like it or not, that takes a long time. That they, which continues to amaze me on the America, that the Americans, knowing their issues with patriots, seeing their issues with patriots in Ukraine, how they're just gobbling them up, and their very limited ability to actually intercept. You'd think by now, I mean, it's been 4 years. You think by now they would have had a factory at least in the works. No, there's nothing been started. They never put the money in for the investment. So there's very limited what they can do in a month or 2 months. They can scrap together whatever reserves they have left. They can buy out their allies and get their missiles that they've sold them previously. And they've already started 3 weeks ago. They were pulling missiles out of South Korea, out of Japan. So in the middle of the night, of course, like the thieves in the night, they're pulling everything out. But again, okay, so now what? You've bought yourself maybe a week or 2 weeks more, unless you think you can suddenly conquer or destroy the Iranian government in another week or 2 weeks of battle. You're back to square one, where again you don't have the missile capacity to intercept. Again, Iran continues to strike. Again, you look like a fool. I don't
So
know.
shouldn't all of these i- i- shouldn't all of this be indicators that the United States at the moment actually doesn't have what it takes to do a ground invasion, doesn't have what it takes in order to continue the war? I mean, not enough missiles and so on to fire, not enough replenishment, not enough men, not enough air superiority. I mean, they told the world that they had Iran was open skies and whatnot, and their stuff has been brought down time and time again. So all of these should tell us that the United States lacks the ability to actually continue. So this would indicate to me that they should have all the incentive to maintain the ceasefire. If not go to a full peace agreement, at least maintain the ceasefire, because if it goes back to shooting at each other, the United States is at the shorter end of the stick for the first time in a long time. And maybe let's just add to this. I don't know if you've heard about this or not. I was informed this morning by Rainer Rupp, that apparently a very, very important US drone of the type MQ-4C Triton went missing near or over Iran, and this is a surveillance drone. I cannot confirm whether that is actually the case or not, but I've heard about it, or this has been reported on in several media outlets. Have you heard about it, and do you know what we can deduce from that instance?
I haven't heard about it yet, but then again, I was taking my 3 hours of sleep between between
Right.
between the morning show and yeah, so I've still got to go and go through the news. That's the big problem with 24-hour news cycles. Uh, the human body and brain isn't built for that.
Yeah, and the problem at the moment is also that this kind of news, we cannot be sure whether this
Really,
is the hearsay. I mean, it's circulating that this Navy MQ-4C Triton disappeared, and people are now speculating whether the Iranians managed to divert it, because they managed to do so once in 2013 with another drone that diverted, like pretend to give it like
yeah,
false
it's a Reaper, yeah, with
Reaper,
a engine package on it.
and get it to land in Iran, and then basically, reverse engineer the whole thing. So, and this MQ4, MC4, MQ4C would be an even bigger feast, because it is a surveillance drone with latest surveillance technology and so on and so forth. But again, like all of this, shouldn't this actually send all of the signals to Washington that what they need to do is to prevent again the hostilities from resuming, or how do you read it?
Oh, Pascal, if we were dealing with absolutely rational players, of course, if we were dealing with rational players, this whole war wouldn't have started. But we're not dealing with with rational players in Washington, and B, as we've seen in these negotiations, the people behind the wheel of the bus are not Americans; they're Israelis. Israel's agreed to this quote ceasefire with Lebanon. That's not really a ceasefire, and it's just the Lebanese government pathetically betraying its own people, pathetically surrendering a third of its own country. Basically, it's a Quisling government. If nobody understands what Quisling, where the word Quisling comes from, look up World War II history, Norway. Uh, the chancellor of Norway, who was a Nazi after the German occupation, was his family name was Quisling, so he got famous, whether you liked it or not. Don't betray your own people, in other words. But yeah, so they betrayed their own country, and Hezbollah is continuing to fight. Nobody stopped that. So what the Israelis do next, I don't know. But Lebanon is part of this deal. It's a breaking point for this deal if the Israelis continue doing what they've been doing, which is genocide.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, by the way, the Israelis, instead of playing one portion of Lebanon off of another portion, as they've always done, usually allying with the Christians against the Shiites and leaving the Sunnis alone. They've started just massacring everybody across the board. They don't care this time around. They're going for and it's not occupation; it's annexation minus the population. It's genocide and annexation of territory.
Yeah.
So
And of course, the
but that's the driving seat.
yeah, and Israel can, of course, at any point in time, like ruin any kind of process that the United States might want to go
Yep.
to. On the other hand, the ceasefire has a hard stop. It's a 15-day ceasefire, and that will end in about a week from now. And Iran,
Yeah.
at any point in time, can say like 15 days are over. We are starting shooting again. So it is a sunset clause on the on not shooting. So overall, this puts tremendous pressure on Washington, doesn't it? So, in Moscow, though, what do you hear about what the assessment is of the impact of this war now on the United States? I mean, there must be people in Moscow quite excited about the United States getting bogged down in such an affair.
Oh, of course. I mean, that's beyond a doubt. That doesn't mean that Moscow wants to sacrifice Iran. It doesn't, and it's supporting Iran quite actively, as actively as you can when you're fighting 50 other countries. Uh, Yesterday, there was a list of drone manufacturers uh, that came out. I would hope that they heard the message that they're going to be targeted, but probably not.
Drone manufacturers in Europe.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
in Europe, that are directly manufacturing drones for Ukraine. Unfortunately, I think until strikes start into Europe, they're not going to hear anything. These people are tone deaf. I mean, just to understand how insane the European leadership and the people that support them, which is the majority of the population, really are. How out to lunch these people are. They were doing a thought exercise. Kind of thought exercise, planning exercise. On preparing to take mass casualties, combat casualties. So they were checking their hospitals and things like that, evacuation routes to be able to handle casualties from a big war with Russia. And they're planning on accepting 1,000 wounded a day. Like, are you insane? Right now, Ukraine has taken about 2,000 wounded per day, and Russia's fighting with one arm and one leg tied behind its back, with another 350,000 troops that haven't been pulled in, sitting on the sidelines, plus the rest of the military along the borders. If you're talking a full war with Russia from the European Union, some European army, which would just be NATO minus the U.S., you're talking about mass mobilization off the Russian side, obviously mass mobilization on the European side. You're talking about 30, 40 million people fighting. You'll be taking tens of thousands of wounded per hour. And these people really have no basis in sanity when they're looking at this. And yet, that's what they keep talking about. And with Hungary becoming basically a vassal state back to van der Leyen, you're looking at war in Europe at 100%. Okay, nothing's 100%, 99 plus.
Yeah, but you see, the sick thing is that now now starting the game of trying to bait the Russians into attacking these missile and drone facilities in the EU is actually part of the game, right? Just the way that trying to bait Russia into attacking Ukraine was part and parcel of the game of the game. The moment Russia stepped over these Ukrainian, I mean, officially went into this Ukrainian territory with on 24th of February 2022 was the day when they opened the big and the good champagne bottles over there in Brussels. So in the same way, then now baiting Russia into actually attacking these production facilities in the rear, while all the way claiming that they are not part of the war. We're not part of the war. We're not part of the war. We're just supporting Ukraine with all of these with all of this equipment, and then having the equipment destroyed will give them everything they need to say, look, we've been right. The Russians are attacking us. We told you all the way that they would attack us, and now they're attacking us. And now we all need to fight. All 450 million of us need to go and fight the Russians. I mean, that's exactly the sick name of the game. So what would Russia do against this one?
Well, first of all, at this point, Russia has no choice. What we're looking at is their strategies obviously is to they're looking at to double their drone production onto the Russian battlefield, overwhelm Russian defenses, and just strike everything inside of Russia. And while the Russian defenses are ahead of the game, you can't stop 100% of anything when you put enough targets into the area. And while the Russians are still ahead of the game and can more or less handle most of what's coming through, if they continue to rev up their production, no, Russia cannot rev up anti-aircraft systems as fast as the West can rev up production of drones. So this puts it to a point of either Russia survives or Europe dies. Oh, that's quite literally the choice. I personally vote for Russia, all things considered, and so does 150 million other people. So the government will have backings. What they don't understand, though, is this will, of course, very quickly expand, and this will very quickly expand in both directions. And what they're going to be facing with a subcontinent that has a very has a shortage of gas, has a shortage of oil, has a shortage of food, is about to get much, much worse because once this expands and counterstrikes and strikes and counterstrikes, and they'll go very quickly at that point. And now you're looking at what's the next thing Russia's going to strike once this continues expanding. And that becomes the energy infrastructure in Europe. That becomes the leadership in Europe. I wouldn't suggest sticking around in the Euro Parliament or NATO headquarters for very long. Russians fly very fast and strike very deep. And I'm saying that quite literally. In my, that this becomes an issue of if this is a full war, decapitate the leadership instantly from of the Europeans, and Russia can do that without ever going nuclear. Russia can decapitate fully. I don't think they even realize this. I mean, Rheinmetall, I wouldn't be working there once things really start going because that's another area it's just going to be destroyed. But as long as if the Americans are neutral, they're buying equipment from the Americans, they at least have a backstop that they can get equipment from. Anything inside of Europe is in striking range by Russia. And while things like drone manufacturing, you can, particularly small drones or small arms manufacturing, you can farm out to various small manufacturing plants and you can hide them in warehouses and places like that. You can't do that when you're trying to build heavy equipment. Let's just begin with that. You need obviously large manufacturing facilities. If you're putting together tanks, if you're putting together armored vehicles, you can't hide that. Those are massive targets that are going to be hard to hide. But again, the energy infrastructure in Europe, when you're reliant on LNG, that's a very narrow infrastructure that can easily be destroyed. And then all the LNG tankers can arrive that you want, but they got no place to unload. You have no storage facilities because Russia can take out any storage gas storage facility in Germany. It'll bore down deep enough and for all of it to go one big bang. When you're looking at that, it's suicide. But you're dealing with people that are not rational yet. Russia will have to act off of its own rational views on survival. And when Never mind, it's a nuclear state that you're trying to threaten with extinction. That usually means you get a nuclear response, and Europe just won't survive a nuclear response. Europe is a small cage with a lot of people in it. Any strike inside of Europe will cover massive amounts of territory, population wise.
No, in
Yeah,
any
you know,
kind of
you,
in any kind of rational world, the Europeans would want to wind that kind of threat, that kind of fear immediately down, right? And
yeah,
de-escalate and get to
you
a
would
point
think.
where we have an agreement with the Russians. But unfortunately, we are not in a rational moment. We are in some form like, cultural revolution type of moment. If you compare what the Chinese did about 50, 60 years ago, right?
Well,
Sometimes
right.
these large groups, they go berserk and they hurt themselves. And Europe is at the moment in one of those. So the question to me is, can Russia somehow wind down the Ukraine war and take away that toy? Because by now the Europeans are using it as a toy in order to do a proxy war. I mean, of course, through the Americans as well, to channel their proxy war against Russia. And we've heard the German chancellor recently saying that he will do his best and find all of the military aged Ukrainians in Germany and send them back so that they can go and die for the this stupid project. But that's what they're doing, like more people into the meat grinder. It's absolutely inhumane. It's absolutely horrible. But the counter strategy from Russia could be to try to wind down the Ukraine war and take the war fighting toy away. Are we looking at then a spring or summer offensive that could potentially achieve that? And if so, like, would it include Galicia?
Well, Russia's already started that spring offensive in several directions. Problem is drones are predominant everywhere. Anti-drone technologies are advancing, but they're just not in that stage where they can actually change things very meaningfully. There's a lot of anti-drone technologies. There's anti-drone drones that that the Russian military has that you can just line up with a drone that's flying, shoot it, and the AI in it will just target it. It's a kinetic hit. So your drone will just knock out the other drone out of the sky. There's automated machine gun posts that track and destroy drones. There's lasers the Chinese manufacturer have been using on field testing, using it on the battlefield. They're very effective. And lots of other things. But again, attack drones, that the FPV drones, they're very cheap and easy to manufacture. That you can set up a drone manufacturer with the right chipsets. And there's Chinese companies that are selling something like $2 or $3 billion worth of chips to Ukraine. Now, this goes against the official line from the government, but it's still happening. That's going to be one of those issues that's going to get brought up between Vladimir Vladimirovich and he to shut that down. But the point is you can still manufacture these drones relatively cheap and in mass. Faster than the Russian army can advance through that drone wall, and it's advancing. It's advancing in every direction again because the ground's gotten hardened up. It's dried up. Advances back on. Zelensky right now is promising a new super offensive in 27. For that, of course, he needs manpower. And yes, you're right. But Germany's just going to be the first start. Look, the troubles in Ireland, which may lead still to a revolution, it seems to be boiling in that direction very quickly. A very large part of that is because of the Ukrainians. Ireland has taken in per capita more Ukrainians than anybody else short of Russia. Of course, in Russia, they don't get special treatment. They come into Russia, they can get citizenship, go find a job, just like everybody else, and just fit into society. In Europe, they get privileged status. So Ireland, which is suffering economically as it is, it's taken per capita per 100,000 citizens. It's taken in 18 Ukrainians per 100,000. Germany 13 per 100,000. So Ireland, with a much smaller population, is expected to absorb a large amount of Ukrainian, quote, refugees, a lot of whom are in very expensive automobiles. They get housing. Their kids are first in line for schools. They get pocket money. Meanwhile, the Irish are getting the street. And anger is obviously exploding now. It's gone to the boiling point. There's issues with other of course, there's issues with other quote refugees that have been flooded into Ireland. That's pissing people off. But from what I've talked to several Irish that I'm friends with, who are one of them's a journalist, another one's an activist. The number one thing is now Ukrainians, and they're chauvinistic inside of Ireland, which just pisses the Irish off. If you're a guest, act like a guest. You're not the owner. You're not the co-equal. So to lower those, and that's, by the way, before food prices going to skyrocket in the next 3 months when the first bad harvests come in, much reduced. This is with petrol prices already skyrocketing. Winter's not beyond the mountains. We may be in mid-spring, but winter's not beyond the mountains. This is the point where you're supposed to start getting reserves of gas for winter. There aren't any. This brings into question how the hell you'd survive, period, on just what you have, let alone build up any reserves. And people are getting angry. And the best way to lower that tension is to get rid of at least one of the irritants. And one of those irritants happens to be Ukrainian men. And what better way to get rid of them than to physically get rid of them? Toss them on the battlefield. They'll die off on the battlefield, and they buy you time to prepare for the big war. That's what we're looking at. And I think that's going to be a big trend throughout the European countries, is grabbing the Ukrainians and sending them off to the battlefield. And again, quite a few Ukrainians are now rushing toward Russia through Belarus because they figured that out. They're going to get, they're the sacrificial lamb, and they are going to get herded in massive quantities, shepherded off to go die, what they ran away from. So that's the situation. And yeah, I think Germany is saying the silent part out loud, but I think all the European states are now looking at doing this for various reasons, internal reasons, and reasons for supporting this psychotic war effort. So I don't, this isn't going to end in 1 year at this point, unless there's some major breakthrough like EMP technologies that can take down the drones as they're flying without using a nuclear warhead to create a big enough EMP burst. And then there's development in those fields too. So unless something radical arrives on the battlefield sometime soon to negate the drones, this will be a continued slow push forward. And as long as Europe starts shoving men into the ranks, and and the Ukrainians, by the way, if you look at it, they're now shoving women into the ranks faster than ever before. The number of percentage of women in the armed forces of Ukraine has grown to 13.5%. On the battlefield itself, it went from 5% to 7.5% just over the last year. And they're just now they're still kind of pushing them in without doing press gangs, but that's down the road also. This is the last Ukrainian, for God's sakes. They don't. I mean, the leadership. This is money making for the leadership. This is profits.
It's
Quite literally meat profits.
No, it's extremely sick, and it's of course also this entire cynicism of the EU to say like, oh no, we're doing it for the Ukrainians, and now we're rounding them up and sending them into certain death. But that's what they're doing, and that's what they will do with their own populations. I mean, these are people have no limits, and as Alex Christopher, who keeps saying, they also have no reverse gear. So but that means for Russia, there's no other strategy at the moment than to somehow have a war economy and a war capacities that just are able to keep grinding this down, right? It's like, what else are you going to do? Because apparently, yeah, it's not possible physically to overwhelm all of that and stop it down. So on both sides, we now have the machinery that is already, after 4 years, trained in dealing with each other. Huh?
Well, I know the Europeans like to, in the West loves to talk about Russia is on a war economy. Russia's not in a war economy. Russia is spending about 6-7% of GDP on this. War economy would be closer to 30 to 40% of GDP. If Russia goes onto a war economy, if we emulate anything that was close to the Great Patriotic War, World War II, where everybody's either into the battlefield, into the direct support of battlefield, or into the factories, Europe is going to get destroyed, just conventionally. Russia can put under arms 30 million soldiers, quite literally. I mean, women and children off to the factories, and we start a mass manufacture. It'd take a little while for it to rev up, obviously, uh, but it is possible. When the country there's no declaration of war. Once war is declared, we're talking about a whole different matrix of thought. We're talking a whole different matrix of abilities of the government to perform. I mean, that's when the government goes, "Oh, we liked your pickup. We needed the battlefront. Here's a voucher. Go get some money for it when the war's over." Off goes the pickup. That's when you have full mobilization of all the assets in the country. And Russia's resources are, compared to Europe, quite limitless. Europe is in a much, much worse place than it was in World War II when it comes to energy security and ability to produce. Partially because, unlike World War II, where the Russian ability to strike deep into the European Reich, which was, oh, I'm sorry, the new European order. The Czechs were happily producing tanks for the Germans. So were the French in the north, and so on. The ability to strike deep in was very limited. The ability to strike deep in instantly now is absolutely open. It exists, and worse for the Europeans in this case is everything's on a sheet of paper. Basically, everything's visible. There's no place you can hide a large factory. Everything's known. Any concentrations are going to be known. Satellites are constantly watching, absolutely constantly watching. So again, in a sane world, they would be de-escalating very quickly, just like the European leadership was de-escalating as fast as they could when medium-range nuclear missiles became the big thing back in the 70s and 80s. That terrified them. It properly terrified them because it told them, if there's a nuclear war, it's not the U.S. And the Soviet Union. The first is going to be you, and you're going to get exterminated. And that terrified them, as it should have. And they were one of the biggest pushes toward resolution of the Cold War. But that's when adults ran the shop. Now you have adult bodies
Yeah.
and I don't want to get crude in saying this, but they're basically retarded people running that. I mean, mentally deficient, absolutely mentally deficient individuals.
Most importantly, it was the Europe used to be run by people who actually like Europe. Now
Oh
it's
yes,
run by people. Now it's run by people literally who used to work for BlackRock and who
yeah,
understand that retirement in Miami is much nicer and more interesting than being stuck somewhere in gray old Berlin, right? And where it's understood that having being on the other side of the pond is actually nicer. So like they look at Europe in the same sense that they look at Ukraine as something to use. And if it doesn't work, if it breaks, then well, you did your best and you have now your retirement and you're going to be a decorated blah blah something in one of the think tanks. And well, that's better than being in that crappy place there on the other side of the
right.
Atlantic, right?
And
So
I would
I
even
mean,
take it.
these people are insanely like
Yeah,
integrated in the transatlantic network.
yes,
They think in those terms, and you see where Annalena Baerbock now is, right? The former foreign
yeah.
minister of Germany, right? And she leveled up, and she's now in New York.
Yeah, I'll take it even further. It's not that they don't like Europe. I think they hate their own citizens.
Yeah, the despise they have. I mean, if you look at Ursula von der Leyen's recent comment about the best energy, the cheapest energy is the one you don't use.
Yeah,
It's like,
go
did you
storm
really just
trees.
say that? Did you really just say that we are the problem, that we need energy and we need to be cheaper by not using energy? She said that, and they think
Yeah,
like this.
yeah,
They hate their own
yeah.
people while they
They
take
hate their own
airplanes to
people.
fly to WEF in Davos, right?
Yeah, I mean, you listen to these elites; they flat out they hate their own people. You could say whatever you want about Hitler, and I'm not defending Hitler, but in his own skewed manner, he loved the German people, including the Austrian, as one big German
You know,
people.
you just quoted Morty from Rick and Morty. He said even Hitler liked Germany or something like
Yeah,
that. He was
exactly.
like, no, yeah, no defense for Hitler at all. But the current leadership of Europe, the biggest problem I think Russia has is that leadership thinks Europe is dispensable, and that's a
It
big problem.
is exactly.
You cannot
Uh,
you cannot hear these people anymore. That's Karaganov. I mean, even Karaganov like has to kind of come to terms like how to deal with people who do not actually like the places they're running.
Right. And the amazing part is the sheep are still sheep. The vast majority of sheep are still asleep. They're going back. even though they're now being herded straight over to the meat processing plant. And they're still going, look, there's still some more green grass to eat along the way. The majority of Europeans are absolute sheep. They're blind, they're deaf, and they are suffering from a normalcy syndrome. Oh, everything was fine yesterday, everything's fine today, so everything's going to be fine tomorrow. And they're not noticing that, again, they're getting closer and closer to the meat processing plant. Time to wake up.
Yeah, but they keep saying, look, the meat processing plant is coming. It's coming. And now that you're very close to it, look, it's here. And here in you go. See, I told you would be in there. I mean, within their sick, twisted world, it even makes sense. It even makes sense.
Yeah. When do we start screaming Soylent Green as people?
Sorry?
When do we start screaming Soylent Green as people?
I don't know the reference. Sorry.
Oh, geez. Okay, you need to watch the movie. So it's a Heston movie from the 60s where they have the world is mass overpopulated, like 100 billion people, that mass overpopulated. And the government can't figure out how to feed people. So people keep coming out in protests. They keep disappearing. They're being rounded up. And what turns and then this new product appears, Soylent Green, to mass feed the people. And then Charleston Heston, he gets in there. He finds out what Soylent Green is made from. And he's running out at the end of the movie screaming, Soylent Green is people! Because they're just the people that are rounding up, they're processing as food for the rest of society. So, they're eating their own. And that, again, so when in Europe do we start screaming Soylent Green as people?
Maybe the day is not too far away, but it's gonna be sad. Good, Stas. Thank you very much. We covered Iran, we covered Russia and the sad state we are in. I wish that at some point we could talk about things going right. I mean, going good. People who want to find you, they should find you on your YouTube channel and on X and on your Substack.
Yes. X is Stanis Krapivnik. We can get the whole name in. So we Russians like long names. That's how we get the education system up. You start have to write your own name. It's so freaking long. On X, that's on X. On YouTube, it's at Mr. Slavic Man, Slavic with a K. Let's see. On Substack, it's Zmei Garinich, which is a three-headed dragon in Russian mythology. And all the simpler names were taken too.
I will try to put the links to all of those into the description box below if I don't forget. Stanislav Krapivnik, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.